Access to Democracy is made possible thanks to the following organizations. Sheridan & Dulas, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm that has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News and World Report every year since 2009. Sheridan & Dulas are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Distillery was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at their facility. If you're interested in learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check their website and plan a visit to tour their facility and taste their spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm your host, Steve Francisco. Thank you for joining us today on this late summer day here in Minnesota when the weather is getting a little more moderate than it's been lately. We have a good friend of mine and a return visitor to our studio, Dane Smith, author, journalist, thinker. I like adding that to your category, your resume too, Dane, because you're one of the people that I always appreciate the thought that you give to political issues and to whatever we're talking about. Welcome back to Access to Democracy.
Always a pleasure.
So for those viewers who may not have seen any of your previous interviews, you're, as they say, you're not originally from these parts, are you? Where did you come from? What brought you to Minnesota, and how long have you been here?
I'm a Texas native, actually, and my roots go in the way back in the South, almost to Jamestown Colony. So I'm Southern by heritage. I grew up in Alaska, however. My parents moved up there when I was infant. And I married into Minnesota in the early 70s. So I've been in Minnesota now for more than 55 years. And much of my, I've had a wonderful career in journalism. I was a newspaper reporter for many years. And
Who did you work for again?
Star Tribune and the Pioneer Press,
Yep.
back and forth. And then most of that time covering politics at the state, local, and federal level. So democracy is a primary interest to me. And then for about 15 years, I worked in various capacities for Growth and Justice, which is a think tank focused. Our basic theme was that social justice, economic justice, is actually good for business.
Good for Minnesota.
Good for Minnesota.
For everyone.
Right.
And also, you've been a regular contributor to our online newspaper called MinPost.
Yes.
Tell us about, some of our viewers may recognize you now because you were on the show several times over the past year or two talking about a series you did, I believe it was called Reappraising the Good Life in Minnesota,
Right.
which examined changes over 50 years in Minnesota society and politics.
Right. Basically, this was an effort to help people understand the big picture about Minnesota's essence politically and how that has evolved over the years. So actually, the series goes back to the 1858, to the beginning of statehood, and even it acknowledges the strong influence of indigenous cultures on our society. But it's basically, it was an effort to define Minnesota's essence as egalitarian and communitarian. You might call this liberal, you might call it progressive, but it really is baked into our bread, into our DNA. And I wanted to show how Minnesota has remained true to these principles, always focusing on reducing unfairness and inequality in public policy, more open-minded than other states, and more egalitarian. And of course that word has to do with making things more equal. And in the piece I charted how important the Scandinavian influence was, the abolitionists from New England, and how that has been reinforced by our newer immigrants and communities of color who are also interested in being included in the democratic proposition. And so it's a reappraisal. It's fairly upbeat. I think I'm confident about Minnesota staying in this staying on this course towards a fair society. But we do acknowledge some problems and weaknesses and challenges to that proposition.
Tell us about, you're working on a new article that you've given me a little bit of a preview about, but I'd like to talk to you today. You've teamed up with Dave Beal from the Pioneer Press.
Right.
And you've worked on an article, Minnesota's Warm Internationalism versus Bullying Arrogance of America First.
Right.
Now, that's a loaded title to be sure, and we are going to delve into the details of this.
Right.
I want to open with this thought with you and see where we go with this. The author Mark Twain is credited with saying, quote, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes."
Yes.
And I'm sure you've had that before. In our current politics, we hear a lot of rhetoric about America first and make America great again, nationalism. And are we hearing echoes from our past when we hear these terms, America first?
Yes, absolutely. The idea of America as God's chosen country, as destined to rule the world, as a nation that is favored by the deity, is pretty old in America. But just as important has been a different theme, and that is that of America as an international partner, as an equal partner with other nations of the world, and as a generous and friendly sibling to the brotherhood of humanity.
Sort of more like an open hand rather than always a closed fist.
Right, right. So the forces for colonialism and empire have always been here. The idea that the United States needed to be an empire, that it needed to conquer territory, that it needed to exert its will over the Western Hemisphere. The whole era of the conquest of southwestern part of this continent, that is part of our history for sure. And then in the early part of this century, the early part of the 1900s, another form of America First, actually by that name, Trump often claims to have coined America First, but America First actually was the title of a movement called isolationist movement. Some of which made sense. It was led by many progressive people who did not want to go to war again after World War I, and who were concerned that getting involved in entangling alliances would be not in America's interest. So it was isolationist, but as Nazism arose and these deplorable dictatorships in Italy and Japan, and especially Nazi Germany, began to ascend, an internationalist thought began to challenge that notion that we had to be involved in order to prevent the conquest and the brutal treatment of people through these fascist dictatorships. And so internationalism then became the ascendant idea in America. And I think in general, that has served us well since the end of World War II. And Minnesota actually has been a leader in that internationalist idea. So if there was going to be a headline to the piece would be basically Minnesota's warm internationalism is directly at odds with the idea of what we're seeing now under this new America First kind of brutalist understanding of our relationship to the world, that we're going to be the bully, that we're going to be launching trade wars, that people are no longer welcome here, that we're not going to be generous anymore. All of that is implicit or is bound up in America First that Trump is trying to sell. Even talking about annexing Canada,
Greenland?
against their will in Greenland.
Haven't heard so much of that lately.
No,
I guess,
that kind of went away.
Yeah.
That was so extraordinarily absurd that they dropped it,
Yeah.
thankfully. But in general, the America First that Trump is pushing is inherently at odds with Minnesota's internationalism, and I'd like to focus on that. This studio is in Dakota County, not far from West St. Paul, which was the birthplace of Harold Stassen. This was a Republican governor who was at one time a rising star in American politics. He was an internationalist even before World War II. Mm-hmm. He recognized the threat of fascism around the world, and he broke with the Republicans who were isolationists. And he was recognized for that vision by FDR, a Democratic president, who appointed him to help draw up the charter for the United Nations. So,
And when was that?
And that was 1945. That was
80 years ago.
80 years ago, and that's kind of the peg for our article.
80 years ago in October.
We're coming up on the 80th birthday of the United Nations. And Minnesota was central to that because of Harold Stassen. And since then, we have developed a kind of warm internationalism and an engaging, open-minded relationship with the world that I think is really kind of unique and distinctive, especially for a Midwestern state typically the coastal regions have those international connections more than here, but Minnesota is really different that way in the way that we view the world and the way that we get along with the 96% of the world that is not American.
Let's go back a second. The 1920s, the period that many people refer to as isolationist period in American history. Was it just a reaction to the tragedy of World War I, do you think? Or is it actually more complex than that? Did it have to do with underlying attitudes of nativism,
absolutely,
racism?
I mentioned what I thought were some of the more admirable motivations for America First, but it became infused with anti-Semitism, with anti-Catholicism even, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, and an absolute hostility to the people of the world, a feeling that they were
anti-immigrant. And so this is not...
Yes, right, and anti-immigrant, absolutely.
Right.
That period after World War I really kicked off immigration quotas where we just sealed off our borders. And
actually, prior to the 1920s, if I remember some of my American history right, we've even seen this theme earlier in our history, the rise of the Know Nothing Party,
right,
anti-Catholic, anti-Irish immigration.
Anti-immigrant.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a theme that seems to repeat every several decades in our history.
Right, and it's on steroids now.
In the 1870s, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act that banned Chinese immigration after we had used the labor of Chinese immigrants to help complete the Transcontinental Railroad, right?
This is interesting about Minnesota. We were different from that way back when. We welcomed immigrants from Europe in huge numbers, and numbers I don't think most people realize. Most Minnesotans know they're probably German or Scandinavian, older Minnesotans like my wife's family, they're Swedes and Lutherans and Germans. But I don't think most Minnesotans realize the degree to which that was true. In the 1920 census, I think it was 1910, 2030, all those censuses, Minnesota had a larger foreign-born population than almost any other state. It was in the top 5 with New York, Chicago, or Illinois, and some of the big city states. I just think that's fascinating. I think we've had that international-minded connectivity long before the United Nations was formed. So we had that connection, especially to Europe. But then, James J. Hill, our big robber baron from the late 1800s, he built a railroad to Seattle.
The Great Northern Railroad.
The
Empire Builder.
The Empire Builder. Open trade with China, a thriving silk trade. A China Center was established at the U of M long before any other university had such a thing. And so, and then along comes after the war, as aviation took off, our international airport built, our major carrier was Northwest Orient Airlines. It was a major route to the east, especially Japan. And since then, our airport, the growth of multinational corporations has made Minnesota an
Name some of those
international
companies.
center.
We have a large number of Fortune 500 companies.
Well,
here.
every agribusiness company, and we
So
are an agribusiness
Cargill.
state. Cargill, General Mills, Pillsbury, et cetera, but 3M for sure, and United Health. All these companies have strong international
And how about the role,
connections.
Dane, of our educational institutions, beginning with the University of Minnesota, but also our network of private colleges and universities in this state? Have they had a role in shaping sort of this modern Minnesota internationalism?
Certainly. Another factor is the number of nonprofits and NGOs, charitable organizations. Everybody from the International Institute, which is a really unique and wonderful institution that helps immigrants adjust to the United States. We have the Center for the Victims of Torture. We've had governors who have been leading the way in direct international relations between states and foreign nations, led by Rudy Perpich, who actually started trade missions, 2 or 3 a year. He went to Europe in between his first and second terms, became aware of how important international trade was going to be, and was way out front on that. He wanted to create a World Trade Center. It didn't really develop the way he wanted, but succeeding governors, Arne Carlson, Jesse Ventura. I went to China with Jesse Ventura. We're all interested in developing Minnesota's international relationships through trade, cultural exchange, and so Minnesota is really it's often been called the North Coast, and I think that's really apt. We have these direct international flights to many locations that airports our size don't have, and especially in the Midwest. We have access to the Atlantic through the St. Lawrence Seaway and Duluth, and of course the Twin Cities connects to the Gulf of Mexico through the Mississippi. We're a major shipping origin and destination for goods and services that way too. So I think this idea that Minnesota is internationally minded, open-minded, and charitably disposed toward the world is just hugely important to who we are.
This, what you're talking about here, am I understanding you correctly? Your perspective is that's not just a so-called liberal or progressive attitude.
Right.
It was an attitude on the part of Republicans as
Yes.
well, such as Harold Stassen, Arne Carlson, and others.
Absolutely. And it's shared by the business community,
Yeah.
which is acutely aware of how important and interconnected the world is. And that's completely at odds with almost everything we see coming out of the Trump administration. It's all about bluster and a fist and this notion that America has somehow been a victim of,
That we've been taken advantage
of. In fact, I think the case is the opposite.
I want to delve into that in a little more detail with you. You know, I think many of us who grew up here in Minnesota during a certain period of time in American history, we look back and we remember people like Hubert Humphrey, who was an author of the Peace Corps, which was signed into law by President John F. Kennedy in the 1960s. He worked with Senator George McGovern of South Dakota to create Food for Peace, to send surplus agricultural production to some of the places where people were starving and dying in famine.
And which was a great boon for Minnesota farmers.
For our own farmers who received income from the government. But what I want to ask you about, we've seen just this year, since President Trump has come back into office, he has moved to scale back the Peace Corps. He's abolished the U.S. Agency for International Development. Are we ceding ground to other countries in the exercise of so-called soft power? The contrast between military power is hard power, Soft power is the humanitarian work that America does around the world that benefits America and the rest of the world. Are we ceding ground to other countries, and who are they?
Absolutely. We were the leader in soft power for decades. Our generosity actually had a purpose of strengthening the United States in the eyes of the world. We were highly regarded by the world for decades. Many surveys now show that regard for the United States as a friend, as an admirable nation, have just plummeted throughout the world. But the bigger problem strategically is that China is filling that void. There's been a lot of commentary about how China, the Silk Road policies, and others are just pouring infrastructure assistance into every nation across the globe, especially in South America and Africa, and they are replacing us in many aspects of United Nations activity. And the hard right, extremist conservative forces in this country have always demonized the United Nations, but it's here to stay, and it's a durable institution, and we're checking out of it basically.
When we talk about China and how they're moving into the developing world, really replacing the role that the United States and American businesses used to play, my wife and I saw an example of that this spring when we traveled to southern Africa. We were in Windhoek in Namibia, the capital city of Namibia. And I mentioned to you earlier before the show that we were in an international airport, brand new sparkling airport, and there was a plaque on the wall, built by the People's Republic of China.
I saw the same thing in Costa Rica, a football stadium built by China.
Yeah, so they're moving into other countries in Africa and helping those countries develop economically. Tell me, what is your sense of how bad the tariffs are that the Trump administration has been levying, particularly on the developing world? You know, you see these cases where the administration is delaying the imposition of some tariffs with some countries. Other countries, they're going full bore. We just recently saw that the administration levying, I believe it was 35% tariff on all products coming into the United States from India.
Right.
Aside from the fact that it's not those governments that pay the tariffs, it's American importers, then American consumers. What do you see as the impact on development in those countries when they have to deal with these tariffs that make their exports less attractive to American consumers?
I don't see how it possibly can help. It has to have a damaging impact, and I don't think that,
So you don't believe it's going to bring American businesses back or American factories and jobs to the U.S. by levying tariffs on foreign-made goods?
I don't, but that's because I'm listening to 90% of economists who already have weighed in on that. The thing to remember here too is that not only is that Trump's policy often doesn't seem to actually have some grand thesis that guides it. Much of his policy towards and relationships with other nations seems to be driven by his personal financial interests. We're establishing ties with the Persian Gulf oil countries, ruthless monarchies and dictatorships that are tremendously benefiting his family. And many analysts are looking at Trump's trade policies and quickly seeing that it has to do with how much money he personally can make. And that is very disturbing, that there is a corruption to it. And so it's not just the idea of America being a newly aggressive and malevolent bully. It's the idea of corruption driving foreign policy too. And this should set off alarms everywhere. And in fact, one of his biggest critics, of course, has been John Bolton, who has made exactly this case, that Trump doesn't really have a worldview. It's about Trump himself. And guess what happened this morning? Trump's house was raided.
Bolton's house.
Bolton's house was raided by the FBI.
supposedly looking for classified documents
Right.
related to his publication of a book in 2020.
Right, that was highly critical of
Yeah,
Trump's foreign
which-
policy. Now, Bolton is not some liberal nut. He was a top official for the Bush administration, and he was often accused by liberals of being triumphalist himself.
He was a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations,
Exactly.
as I recall, too. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we'll see what comes of the current legal situation he finds himself in, but it does have the smell of retribution, doesn't it? Until
Yes.
we find further facts that would validate whether he did anything wrong. And of course, underlying the search of his house is this issue about, is he in possession of classified documents that he shouldn't have been? We don't know the answer to that question yet. We do know the answer to that question with respect to President Trump himself,
Right.
that he was illegally in possession of classified documents after he left the White House
Right.
and was ordered to return them and didn't. Tried to engage in a long negotiation with the government about
Right.
returning documents that he had no right to possess.
There's a whole other dimension to this internationalism versus nationalism, too, that I just want to touch on, and that has to do with war and peace. Minnesota has produced peacemakers of the first order, magnitude, and people who opposed our ventures into disastrous foreign wars, including Gene McCarthy in 1968, broke with the administration on the Vietnam War, and then our own Paul Wellstone, who broke with the disastrous Middle Eastern War as it was getting underway in 2004. We have lots
The
of
authorization to go to war in Iraq. as I
Exactly.
recall. Yeah.
and we have many other organizations in this state that are focused on peace and peace building. Mel Duncan leads an organization, puts boots on the ground to try and find peace. And all we hear about in our Defense Department now is lethality, and the idea that America will be prepared to inflict violence at the drop of a hat, which we've already done in Iran, probably without any real effect. So I think we have to keep this in mind too, that people like Walter Mondale and many Republicans also were focused on peaceful relationships and the idea of elevating human rights as a condition of American alliance
That was
and
a
cooperation.
cornerstone of the Carter-Mondale
Exactly.
administration foreign policy.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. And that's all gone by the wayside. Trump is actually making enemies of our allies who have the strongest human rights protections, liberal democracies, open societies, all over Europe, Japan, England, Canada, Germany, France, Scandinavia, all of the best and most functioning democracies with civil liberties and human rights are now being pushed away. They are the enemies, and the friends are the worst autocrats in the world, which include, of course, Putin, tin-horn dictators all over the world, including people like Orban in Hungary and Erdogan and others. Those are our new friends. It's staggering. It boggles the mind.
Dane, I wish we could end on a more optimistic note. We can only hope that voters become more attuned to what's going on and the changes, profound anti-democratic changes that are happening in our country today and actually going on around the world. So, well, we look forward to continuing this discussion with you at a future date. Thank you for coming on Access to Democracy once again to share with us your words of wisdom and your insights about where we are in our politics and America's place in the world and Minnesota's place in the world. Thank you for being on Access to Democracy.
Well, thanks for being such a thoughtful host.